Cool. Okay, then. So using multiple classes together. You've done a little bit of this already, potentially using in your bar spikes exercise, depending on which user stories you've come to at the moment. But if you're using two classes, the part that I want to focus on is how we ask for another class to do some work for itself. Let me demonstrate a small example of what I'm talking about. Imagine we have a very simple class called a smiley. Now, the whole purpose of this class is to do one thing only, and that is to return what kind of smiley? Let's do that kind of smiley. So the whole purpose of this class is to have a method that returns a string in the form of a smiley face. And I want another class to ask smiley to run its get method. So imagine I have a second class called greeter, because it's going to say greeting, like hello. That has one method. And here, I want it to be able to ask smiley to do something. So first of all, we have to create an instance of smiley. It's an instance method. So we create an instance of our smiley class. And then I want to return a string, something like hello, and then ask smiley to do its work. So the way that I'm using two classes together in this example is by having almost like a main class, and it creates an instance of smiley when I run its greet method and asks smiley to run its method, and then it returns a value. So when this executes smiley.get, it will return a string. So the only thing I need to do to make these two classes work together is create my instance of greeter and ask greeter to greet. So this is a small example of using two classes together. And let's run it and see what happens. Let me make this a bit bigger so you can see it. Cool. So as you might expect, I managed to successfully interpolate the two strings. Now, this line here is what we call a dependency. It's a fancy word, but all it means is that greeter depends on smiley. This class depends on smiley in the way that it's written. So it needs to have knowledge of the name of this class and the fact that this class has a method called get. And when we see dependencies, they introduce some brittleness because it means I can't easily change the way that this class works. If I change the way that this class works, or if I change something, then I need to be very careful about what happens with my smiley. What happens with my smiley? That's a nice phrase. What does happen with your smiley? So this is essentially option one. Let's keep this up here for reference. Using two classes together, I'm using two classes together, it's great, it's fine, it works. Now, if I wanted to say, well, actually, I want to find a way to not just use smiley, but be able to use a different kind of class. So my greeter is going to remain the same, but I want to use a different thing. If I want to try and do that, I have to go into my code and change it to the source code to then rerun it. So let's have a look at an example. Imagine I have, let's say, Sadi. There's a sad face, maybe. And let's say it's sad face. How do I now use Sadi with greeter? It's more difficult at the moment because this is hard coded in. And when I mean hard coded, it means I'm referencing the actual class inside of this method definition. So if I want to be able to use this class, I actually have to go in here and change this definition to something like Sadi.new. I might also therefore want to change the name of this to make it make sense. So I'm going to just move this a little bit below, so we have the class definition already. And I'm going to run this code, and we're going to see that if I've managed to successfully change the way the code works. Cool, I have. But notice that I've had to go through and rename 3 things. I really only had to, I guess, rename this, but this is a hard-coded dependency. Now, if I have lots of different options here with like classes to use, then it becomes possible that I could find a way to change the way these 2 classes work together. So does anyone have any bright ideas about how I could find a way to not have a hard-coded dependency but still make this code work? Anyone have any ideas? If I refer to something, yeah, so go ahead, Emmett.
You can use inheritance, right? So you could do Sadi and Smiley sit within greeter.
So at the moment, I don't want to think about using inheritance, but there is something that you're doing here that is interesting to me. Inheritance means you're trying to find something that's like an abstraction of both, maybe. Maybe that's something that is what you're trying to get at. What I'd like here is to find a way to not have to refer to the class specifically. And how can I use a variable or something else to sort of represent what this class is?
What about parameter? So greet and then.
Cool. Okay. So this is a really interesting idea. Go ahead. We're going to use an argument to our greet method, and what would that be?
So if we want to use both smiley or sad, then put expression.
Cool. And
then you could just run expression. You could get rid of that line and just have expression.get in there. Instead of Sadi, you could put expression there.
Cool. So then what would change about how I would run this code?
You would have to have your argument in your, after greet. You'd have to put...
what would I put in here?
You would have to put Sadi.new or Smiley.new.
Cool. Okay, so let's do that. Let's do Smiley.new. And pass it in. And let's also do okay. Let's run it, and then we'll go through Amit's suggestion. So we've now managed to find a way to use greeter. And using this idea of passing it as an argument, we can get it to not necessarily care exactly what is the smiley, but get it to do some work. And it's just by using an argument, we just pass it in as an argument, and then we hopefully expect it to be able to have this get method. We just ask the expression, or whatever this is, to run its get method. And so this idea is moving from a hard-coded dependency. Usually we can start there. It's fine to start here at the moment, but then at some point, seeing that we can refer to it as an abstraction, refer to it by an argument name, and we shift creating the instance closer to what we say is a runtime when we actually need to use it, which is down here, when we actually call the method. So this means it's got us a little bit more flexibility. We can use different kinds of objects with a class. It's more modular. We don't need to worry about changing this greeter class anymore. We just need to create different objects so we can use with it. And so we've gone from using a hard-coded dependency to being able to refer to those dependencies via an argument. And this technique is called injecting dependencies, because we're passing it as an argument. Okay, so let's take this step this idea one step further. Where else could we inject the expression dependency? We're at the moment injecting it into the greet method. Where else could we inject it?
Inside the expressions?
Keep going. Can you? What are you thinking?
Like we don't need to have two classes.
Keep going.
I don't know how to do it. It was just a suggestion.
And when you mean the two classes, do you mean Smiley and Sally classes or something else?
No, I meant like have a general class that will put, like, whether you put a smiley face or what inside the get definition of them.
Cool. Yeah, I think that might be a different way of approaching this problem. The moment I'm using these classes just to represent objects. So at the moment they aren't very good representations of what a class should be, because they don't do very much. So I think if this was a real world example, I'd totally with you, because I'd like to destroy classes if they're not useful. But for example, I want to keep Smiley and Sally as representing different objects, but I want to be able to use. So I like the idea, but let's not do it in this example.
Could we have so when you run, if you were to run like smiley.new and then you can pass a parameter into it, would we want to do that? I don't think so.
As in to create different kinds of emojis or different kinds of expressions? So I want to find a way in my greeter class to inject the expression dependency. At the moment, I'm injecting it into my greet method. Another way,
you could inject it at initialization.
Yeah, nice.
You wanted, you knew when you made greeter that you wanted it to be Smiley or Sadie.
Nice. So that's an important bit of information. If the dependency is going to stay the same, then it makes sense to inject it at initialization. And what that means is we just use our initialize method to set up the object with initial state. And so we can move this to here and store it as you might expect. And the only way we need to change it is now access the instance variable. So this is another way that we can say, let's initialize it with initial state, but it's still an expression. And then whenever we call our greet method, we just ask the expression to run itself. So the way that this would change would be we would have to choose different kinds of greeter. So maybe this greeter would be a smiley greeter. Maybe this object here, greeter, would be one that only gives sad faces or sad greetings. So let's run each method and see what we get. So we create a smiley, we create a little sad face, and then we create two different kinds of greeters with two different kinds of expressions. And then we run our method. Cool. Another way that we can use classes together. So the two ways that we've done it is by injecting dependencies, and this idea is passing as an argument either when we needed to run it during the method or during the initialize method. So these are the two most common forms of places where we can inject dependencies. You'll see it quite common in the initialize method to set up objects with other objects that do different kinds of work. And we like this approach because it means we can separate out responsibilities. Now, as Ellen already mentioned, if those dependencies are going to change a lot, then using them as an argument to a method makes more sense. But these are the two different places that you'll have to think about. Do we pass it in as during the object creation at initialization, or do we pass it in the method? You'll see it probably more common here during initialization. So what we changed was changing from a hard-coded dependency inside of the method body to thinking about how can we form an abstraction and passing in either as a method argument or as an initialized argument.
What did you mean by dependencies changing a lot?
Yeah, so the idea behind that is if I had lots of different, in this example, lots of different expressions, rather than constantly creating new greeter objects for each kind, maybe I just want to create one greeter object and have lots of different kinds of expressions that I would need to use a lot of the time. So then it would make a little bit more sense to pass it as an argument. I think that's a little bit vague at the moment. So the example that maybe I would think about is if I had like 10 different expressions and I needed to use them multiple times, one approach would be to create greeter objects for each one of those that pass in the dependency. Another approach would just be create one greeter object and use that greet method with different dependencies. There are pros and cons to both approach. And the only way that I would be able to tell the difference with which one I would, which way or which option I would choose is, do I need to repeat using the expression? So once if I call greet using it here, I might need to keep creating lots of different instances of smile, lots of different instances of saddy every time I call greet, because I'm passing in through the argument. If I need to initialize it once, then it makes more sense to do it once at the initialization. I think that's probably a little bit abstract at the moment, so let's not worry about it. And let's do some examples, and in time we'll be able to answer that question more thoroughly. The purpose of this exercise is to see that we can use classes together, one by hard coding dependency, and then thinking about how we can move it to an argument when we need to use it, either through a method argument or through the initialize argument. So the other option that we had was class greeter, and we had our greet method that hard-coded our smiley. And then returned string. Copy this one as well. Where did my option 2 go? Okay. So what I want you to do in the next section is go through the same example. So I'm going to share this code with you and have a go at changing this approach and removing the hard-coded dependency by passing in as an argument to your greet method, or by creating an initialize method for your greeter class and passing it in through the initialize method. And then we're going to gather back and discuss it, and I'll give you the next exercise to have a look at. So let me just send this code on Slack. Cool. So I've sent the snippet, the code snippet on Slack, and what I'd like you to do is I'm going to pair everyone up and have a go at either the two options. Try both. Remove the dependency, the hard-coded dependency, and get your classes to work together, but pass one in as an argument.